Welcome to the first episode of Microbe Hunters, where today we will begin by going back in time to the year 1680 to talk to the man that truly appreciated all the little things in life, Antony van Leeuwenhoek. Leeuwenhoek was a Dutch man who came from a family of tradesmen. With no formal education or scientific training, Leeuwenhoek made one of the most significant discoveries in biological history and observed a previously unseen world. Using microscopes he made by himself, on one day in 1675, Leeuwenhoek became the first man to view microbes. After interviewing Leeuwenhoek, we will return to the year 2020 and talk to Douglas Anderson, a professor who has devoted much of his life to researching Leeuwenhoek. Good afternoon, Antony. Can you tell me a little bit about where you are from?
Sure. I was born in Delft, Holland on October 24th, 48 years ago. I moved to Amsterdam when I was 16 and apprenticed in a cloth and textile store for 6 years. My time there served as both education and experience for me, and I ultimately returned to Delft to open a store of my own.
So why did you start experimenting?
I did not anticipate making any significant discoveries when I began looking in microscopes. I was just fascinated by the chance to see things much bigger than my naked eye would show me. I studied everything from bee stings to muscle fibers, chiefly from a craving after knowledge which I noticed resides in me more than most other men. I was also inspired by Robert Hooke's book, Micrographia, which had images of the things he saw in his microscopes. It certainly helped that when I began experimenting, I had no awareness of the ridiculous scientific beliefs of the time, like the idea that the mumps are a result of a mumpish evil spirit. I had no scientific theories to fall back on. I had to trust what I saw and use my own judgment.
So you could not really have done much with science if you hadn't begun making microscopes at some point in your life. How did you construct these microscopes?
Well, I began by visiting spectacle makers and apothecaries. I studied the craft of lens making and learned how to extract metals over the fire. My work with microscopes was extremely precise, so much so that my microscopes of less than 1/8 an inch across would magnify objects over 200 times. However, that is all I can share about the process. I really don't want to teach others this skill that took me so long to perfect and end up trapped as an instructor rather than a scientist. If you have the patience and a good eye for proper lighting, though, the microscope is really quite simple to use.
Many scientists admire your work, but the most well known is your observations of rainwater. Can you tell me exactly what you saw in the microscope?
In 1675, I was looking at rainwater that I had collected from a bin in my garden under a microscope. I noticed small animals in the water, smaller than any living creature I had ever seen. When I looked closer, I found that they swam and played around. In that first sample of rainwater, I noticed 4 distinct types of animalcules. I could barely make out their shapes because they were so small, but one type had tiny divers for feet. Another type was rapidly swimming around, turning swiftly once it reached a point like a top. The animalcules were incredible, yet they were smaller than even the hair in a cheese mite.
On that day, you made history. You were the first man to observe animalcules, or what we now call microbes. Was the existence of this world of microorganisms a common belief before you confirmed it?
Like I mentioned before, some of the scientific beliefs these days are ridiculous. However, there are some speculations about microorganisms. It was not at all common, but people ranging from Roman scholars to Italian physicians theorized that diseases were in fact spread by tiny organisms or animals. These were just guesses, though, with no scientific backing or observations. My creation of a microscope that could magnify to nearly 200 times allowed me to prove the world of microorganisms, but I was not the first to have the idea.
Thank you for talking to us today, Antony. We will now return to 2020 to speak with Douglas Anderson about Leeuwenhoek's legacy. Mr. Anderson, why do you think Leeuwenhoek should be remembered?
The real question is, why shouldn't Leeuwenhoek be remembered? After he observed the world of animalcules for the first time in rainwater, he went on to also be the first man to see sperm cells, blood cells, and much more. Because of Antony's work, scientists were exposed to an entirely new world of microorganisms. His diligence and persistence in recording his observations even allowed future scientists, such as the famous biologist Clifford Dobell, to identify certain species based on his descriptions alone. Regardless of his significant contributions to science, which have earned him the title of the father of microbiology, however, the sad truth is that Leeuwenhoek is scarcely remembered. Because he never taught others how he mastered the craft of microscopy, scientists could not match the magnification and clarity of his microscopes for centuries to come, and his discoveries continued to be doubted and questioned. This limited the direct impact Leeuwenhoek had on biology, but in reality, those who came after him, such as Spallanzani and Pasteur, relied on his work. It is hard to say what the science of biology would look like today without Leeuwenhoek.
Leeuwenhoek was obviously very intelligent. Did he get anything wrong?
Like many scientists of the past, Mr. Leeuwenhoek did make some mistakes in his observations and discoveries. For example, although he thoroughly observed microorganisms, he did not suggest any possibility that these animalcules may have caused harm. However, now we know that bacteria such as those that Leeuwenhoek observed are the cause of many diseases that threaten the world today, such as cholera and pneumonia.
Thank you for talking to us, Mr. Anderson. Antony van Leeuwenhoek was a regular Dutch man with an outstanding curiosity. He perfected the craft of microscopy while running his own textile store and used the 500 microscopes he made to look at anything he could put under a lens. His unparalleled drive for knowledge allowed him to discover microbes, tiny animals that appeared to be swimming around in a raindrop. This seemingly simple observation opened up an entirely new world to scientists, while his findings were doubted in the years to come. Now, 300 years later, Leeuwenhoek is credited as being the father of microbiology and the first man to view the microorganisms that surround us every day.